What we find with the possession, when we trace their histories, and there are 5 case histories in that, is that it was a slow consenting year by year. It took about 10, 11, sometimes 14 years for it to happen. When they ended up, they were completely possessed. Some people are finding a very funny idea about possession, Milt and Jerry. They think the possession is the entry of some serpent into the body of the person, you know, and The Exorcist, the film, created a disservice. Now, you must remember about the book and the film, The Exorcist, it's a total fiction. The author never met an exorcist, he was never present at an exorcism, and...
well, Blatty says he based it on a case of exorcism, which...
No, he says it was suggested by it. He just published an article 3 weeks ago in the LA Times, in which he said it. It was suggested by, but he never met the exorcist or anything like that. It was off the top of his head based on the idea.
But well, you say the devil doesn't enter into a body, but in these cases of exorcism, and there are 5 real cases of exorcism that you have investigated closely, I gather you were present in some of these scenes of exorcism.
Yes.
Certainly the total representation is of a body or a soul possessed by some alien evil spirit, which is ultimately expunged, is in fact...
But the possession is not, it's the physical contortions they go through are results of it, which I'll explain in a moment to you. What happens is a lock on the will, much the same as Hitler had over his minions, much the same as Charlie Manson attained over his family. And I'm not saying either were possessed. I had about 9 months to find out whether they were possessed, to examine them. But the real possession arrives at the point that the will is locked. Now, if I have a lock on your will totally, I control your thoughts, your memories, your imagination, your body. I can do what I like with you. Some people going down the road to full possession at a certain moment stop, and they want to get out of it. They can't. What they do is they throw themselves into the contortions a baby does. If a baby is not cleaned or is hungry, it screams, it pulls, it kicks. Finally, it'll bang its head against the ground. And I remember my own father, he had a stroke which paralyzed him completely, he couldn't talk, but when he wanted to direct attention, he burned matches with his right hand, and he made sounds, he moved his hand. It means help me. And that's the state in which we find these people, and therefore, now we don't take it that that is possession. We send them to 3 doctors, and they examine you, you apply, or you're brought for exorcism. They go from the hair of your head to the toes of your feet, and they must completely check you out. If you had a kidney stone, we won't do exorcism over you. If you even have herpes 1, you know these cold sores? No, sir. Any neurological pressure on you, anything at all of a disease, any trace of insanity in the family, although now hereditary insanity is now a moot question for psychologists. But we will not touch you, but you must be checked out. And it's the best checkout you could have. After that, we have 2 psychiatrists who claim to be healthy-minded atheists. Personally, for me, no atheist is healthy-minded. But anyway, I think they're a bit mad. But they're very good psychiatrists. And they always set about gleefully to prove that you're insane, or that you have some neurosis or psychosis, that you have some syndrome.
I gather you're not talking about all the standard diagnostic procedures used before agents of the church finally are willing to acknowledge that they've got a case of possession which requires the rite of exorcism.
This is what we do. This is exactly, thank you, Milt, for the correct, that's exactly what we do beforehand. It all takes about 9
months. Must the 2 psychiatrists be atheists? Is that
no, but they happen
the
to be. We chose them for that reason, so they wouldn't be prejudiced. And they must come back ruefully and say, look, he's all yours. We can find nothing in him to treat. No psychiatrist will ever say you're sane, mainly I think because most psychiatrists are not quite sane themselves. They don't know what normalcy is. Whereas the peasant in the field in Cyprus or Palestine or England or Ireland or Arabia does know what sanity is because they have it in the belly. However, they must come back and say, no, sir, we have nothing to do with this person. He's perfectly normal in pattern and behavior. Then we try exorcism. Only at that point, because we must exclude anything psychological, anything psychic, anything psychiatric, anything medical or physical. Then we start at doing exorcism, and that's when the fun begins.
And so now then we'll proceed with the interviews, and we're going to be discussing the topic of Satan and his influence in the world today, and also in the church. But before we launch into that, I think perhaps you should give our listeners some background or some refresher on just who Satan is and what the origin is of the struggle between good and evil in the world.
Yes, but I feel a little more competent than usual to talk about this, because from about my 3rd year in New York, I got engaged in exorcism. And that was by sheer accident. One night I was rung up by a priest who was in the middle of an exorcism, and his assistant collapsed. So he asked me to put on my clothes and come. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and come over to the Bronx and help him out, which I did. And then that started an association. So I've been in that field for quite a while, and I got very interested in the subject of Satanism and as they call him in America, Old Scrat himself, because we always call him that in America. And so I feel a little confident talking about it. The amazing thing about our friend, or our enemy, as he really is that most people are in possession of half lies about him and half truth. There's very little truth known about the devil. We do know from the church and from Scripture that Satan was an archangel, that he was one of the brightest and most intelligent of the archangels. We do know that he influenced, at the dawn of creation, before man was created, he did influence a whole horde of other angels, telling them that they would be like unto God, that they would have his power. But there's the half-lie. The half-lie of that consists of this. Satan never knew God. He never saw God. If he had seen God, he could never have fallen. He'd be an angel in heaven. So he never knew God, no more than Adam saw God. Adam talked to God and walked with him, as the Scripture says, through a medium of some kind or other. But he didn't see God. Therefore, the devil knows far less about God than we think. In fact, several of the fathers of the church have speculated that hell consists of a huge doubt in Satan's mind. Is he really there? What's he like? Is he really eternal? Will he end too? He doesn't know, because he's been tortured by doubt for the rest of his existence. And if you study the notes left behind by suicides and examine their history, the worst form of suicide is the one who doubts. He doesn't know at all. He's doubtful about his own self, he's doubtful about humanity, doubtful about the other side. It's diabolic. And this is the curse of Satan. He will never know. Number one. Now, he did, though, rebel. And apparently there was, as the Scripture puts it, a great battle between the good angels, led by Michael the Archangel, against Lucifer, the light bearer. Apparently he was called the son of the dawn. He was so brightly intelligent, probably more intelligent than Michael, but not as faithful. And fidelity and faithfulness often win out over intelligence, as we've seen in our own history. So he was defeated. And Jesus, who normally was very, very descriptive and gentle-minded, he had to make reference once to Satan's fall, to Lucifer's fall from heaven when he was defeated. And he said, you've seen the lightning go from the east to the west in one zigzag flash. It takes less than 100th of a second. Well, he said, he fell faster than that. And the utter, not cruelty, but harshness. I mean, there was no streak of mercy. There was he made no bones about it. This angel was punished with supreme punishment. He was condemned to what we call hell. And hell, we do know about hell one thing for sure, which you must hold if you're going to be a faithful Catholic, that there's fire there. Now, fire can be of various kinds, and fire in Scripture can be also spiritual, but that he is tortured there forever with his angels, yes. But God, in view of the world he was going to create, gave Satan a certain series of powers. And those powers are that he would test man. Christians have always wondered, and the church has always speculated about why God did this, because why should God give him a leg at all? As far as we know, God does love purity. He does love mercy. He does love compassion. He loves beauty. But look at the beautiful things he's created in nature, the animals and the babies and flowers and trees, and lakes, mountains, oceans, sky, all the beauties we see around us, ourselves, our own beings. Look at me. My body has been going for 70 years. Only God could create it. It has its own particular beauty in that sense. It's not very beautiful, as you see, like a wrinkled nut, but the machine is still going. Now, but God preferring all those things, he has one great preference: repentance. He loves to exercise mercy. We have to take this as a given, Bernard. This is a thing of God. So how could he do that unless people were tempted and he had to forgive them? He didn't want a perfect world. He wanted to have a world in which he could exercise mercy. And there's this marvelous psalm which has about 127 times, for his mercy is above all his works. And this is what Jesus wanted. And that's why it's so mistaken of people who sin, as we all do, because they're caught by something, either the concupiscence of the flesh, or the concupiscence of the eyes, or the pride of life, or whatever, and they feel they've gone so far that they can't get back. That's the very situation that God envisaged. He wants you to come. He wants to forgive. Until you die, there's that marvelous possibility of being received like the prodigal son. Anyway, so he gave Satan the power of tempting man. Just a word about that. We must remember this angel has extremely limited intelligence. He doesn't know what you know by faith, for instance. He doesn't know it. He doesn't know anything about the angelic life. He doesn't know about the Blessed Sacrament. He knows it's the nameless one, as Satan is called, the Blessed Sacrament. He doesn't know the future. He can't predict the future, except I, for instance, can predict the future. If I look at the clouds and say, yeah, the rain clouds are going to come. He has a greater perception of natural things because he's an angel. He can predict in that sense. But he doesn't know what's going to happen in 1996 or 2004. He's extremely limited. But he is the cleverest liar going because he deals with half-truths. Half-truths. And most of the information you find people trotting out about Lucifer today is the half-lie he's broadcast about himself. And that's so pernicious because that ruins our possibility of knowing him. Now, Lucifer, we know too from the church, was given a certain amount of liberty in the beginning until Christ came. And once Christ died on the cross, he was bound in chains. And the church was given 1,000 years, it was said, in which to flourish. We got that 1,000 years. And according to all of the fathers, what they teach, and the revelations which the church has declared as authentic, that 1,000 years expired about the 1700s or 1800s. And we now are in a moment when Satan was loosed, and again the voice of revelation and the voice of tradition and the voice of the teachers and the church and the saints and the popes comes in and say, but his loosing was only for 100 years, and that freedom of his is coming to an end in our day, in the 1990s. So we have been subject, therefore, to Lucifer's raging freedom to recoup what he lost. Because remember, in that 1,000 years between, say, the year 400 and the year 1400, Christianity spread. Whole peoples were converted. Whole of Europe was. And when they got to Mexico, they converted 8 million in 2 years. Remember, it was astounding. And Christianity did spread. And even today, Christianity is the biggest religion going. And the Catholic Church is 18% of the human race. It's almost 1 billion. So he lost an awful lot. A point about that, Bernard, which we must always remark on, is this. It is dogmatic that not everybody will be saved. There is a destined group whom God has foreseen will cooperate with him and will be saved. But it's not a majority of people, and it's not all the people, which is an error people are pushing nowadays. In other words, so the 1,000 years probably raked in those souls that were to be saved and would cooperate, and the remnant then has struggled since the 1700s until today. And I think that if one looks, and we may in these talks, in these tapes, we may touch on the evidence we now have that Satan is having his last stand. This is his Waterloo, but he's going to kill off, destroy much, scorched earth policy, destroy as much as he can before he finally is shoved down as the abyss again, chained by Michael. And then the reign of Our Lady and the Sacred Heart of Jesus will take place. I'm putting a lot of doctrine and revelation and conclusion into that, but that's the position of Satan. There's one more thing about Lucifer which we should remember, and it's this. We have no protection against him of ourselves. No one can match him on this earth. No one. He can deceive anybody. St. Paul says that he transforms himself into an angel of light. And therefore, no matter how lofty you think your motive is, no matter how correct you think your doctrine is, you need protection. And that protection comes to a Catholic, a Christian, a Catholic, especially in two ways. It comes from the voice of the church, when the church speaks, with a clear voice. Sometimes I wish our churchmen spoke with a clearer voice, but anyway, the church speaks, and the magisterium, as we call it, which nowadays has been rather mute in the voices of its appointed speakers. And number two, you have the protection of Michael and the angels. That's their function. And remember this, that the reason, to go back to Lucifer's beginnings, we know from the fathers that the crisis between him and God concerned Christ. Apparently, to use human language, Lucifer and his angels were shown Jesus Christ as a baby and as a man wandering around Palestine, barefoot, a scrawny Palestinian with a beard and a robe on him, with not a penny, very few pennies in the purse, and he was asked to adore him. And he was shown a vision of this man crucified, which is the same as being hanged, and he was told to adore this thing of clay. And to ask Lucifer to do that? No. He wanted to be up on the mountain of the Most High in the congregation of the North, to be equal to God. He wasn't going to do that.
So it was the sin of pride?
Of course, sin of pride. Sin of pride. He was going to be it. Now, the reason that God did that was that he gave the option to all the angels. This is going to be the situation. You will service this man and his followers. You will protect them. Part of you will be up beside my throne, praying for them and making their prayers ascend to my heart. The other part of you will be steward angels. You will guard their feet. You will guard their houses. You will protect them from wild animals. You'll cure them when they're ill. You'll stave them off when they're feeling guilty, when they're cruel. You'll remind them that they're children of God and they're supposed to be faithful to my laws. Will you do this? Option. Freedom. Or completely autonomous. Lucifer and his people said, no, we're angels. A thing of a lump of clay, born in a bed between the legs of a woman, and finally expiring and being eaten by worms, and we are immortal, and you want us to. So he refused. So it is the sin of pride. And that's why the one great God is to call on the angels, because we don't use them at all. And the funny thing about the angels and Lucifer is this. The funny thing about the angels is that if you don't call on them, they don't be very active. If you call on them and expect about 40% from them, they'll give you 40%. If you call on them and expect 90%, they'll give you 90%. If you call on them and expect 100%, not hoping, hope, as somebody said, is a very good companion but a bad guide. You must believe you're going to get 100%. If you do, you'll get 100%. It's a funny way God has of treating us. The same is true for Our Lady too. At La Salette, when she's speaking to two children, they said, how can we believe you, Lady, Madame? And she said, if you believe in me, I'll believe in you. There's a quid pro quo with God, because he's consented to treat us like that. So with Satan, with Lucifer, as I prefer to call him, those are the only two protections we have against him. Because St. Peter says he's like a lion going around seeking whom he may devour. And he is intent on eviscerating the church, on corrupting your soul and my soul, destroying priesthood, removing the tabernacle, destroying all chastity and purity, completely destroying the family, and producing a world in which there is no church, there is no compassion, there is no pity, there is no love, there is no gentleness, and there is only death and pain and destruction. I work with Satanists who are reformed, and they all tell me the three tests they have to go through in order to become a Satanist, an official Satanist. We'll touch on their existence, by the way, in a later conversation here today. But they have to kill, show they're indifferent to death. Usually they have a puppy dog or a cat or a kitten or something, or a bird. And they have to burn to show a love for fire. And thirdly, they have to be cruel. Not kill, but just cruel. Cause a dog or a cat or a bird or a human being to scream at pain but not kill them, and love to do it. That's the world of Lucifer. And by the way, if you look around at what we consider the blots in our landscape, whether it's Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York or cities in Canada, wherever it is, or Paris or London, what we call the seamy side, the inhuman side, is always filled with what? Death, arson, cruelty to children, to women, to men. So Satan's thumb mark is everywhere, the cloven hoof.
And what are devils?
Devils are those angels who went with Lucifer. They see, you could ask me, and many people have, how many are there? Bernard, in this room, how many people are there sitting?
2.
That's right. And how do you know that? You count. One body, two bodies, second body. Now, an angel hasn't got a body. You can't count them numerically. That's the difficulty. In that world of the spirit, there is no numerical separation because they are spirits. and they haven't got a body, and they're spirits that cannot die. So in our language, there are zillions, there are millions of them. Christ said at the drop of a hat in Gethsemane standing, when Peter drew his sword, he said, "Put up your sword." If I asked my father for one, he said, "A legion." And a legion in his mouth meant hundreds of thousands of angels immediately to defend him. And they're there because they don't take up any space. This whole thing about how many angels stand on the head of a pin is an old Protestant reproach for Catholic philosophers. The head of a pin they don't stand on anything. They're immaterial, but they're real. They're real. Everybody has one. Everybody has a guardian angel. And we are told by some of the fathers, everybody has a devil assigned to them, depending on their character. If I'm a sensuous character, I'm one who wants to tempt me sensually and sexually. If I'm greedy and avaricious, it'll be for money, and all the other various things. But we know from exorcism, by the way, that the devils specialize. And they're very stupid outside that when you get talking to them. They're extremely stupid. But in their métier, in their actual profession, what they're experienced, whether intellectual or they're scientific or mathematical or what, they're very, very clever. They've got their material down pat. So they're formidable things to come up against, and they're very active.
Now, why do modern theologians scoff at the very idea of the devil and guardian angels and the whole concept sometimes even of evil?
I'll tell you what they do, but it's a short answer, and don't be dissatisfied with it until you hear the explanation of it. Simply, they belong to the apostasy. It's as short as that. What does that mean? It means they have lost their faith. If you deny the devils, if you deny the existence of Lucifer, if you deny the existence of sin, of hell, of eternal punishment, you automatically deny Christ's salvation. You automatically deny God's goodness. And the whole purpose of the cross, the whole incarnation is destroyed. In fact, you can't deny the existence of Lucifer without being led inevitably to deny the divinity and the function of Christ as Savior. What's the purpose in Christ coming? What is the purpose? To make a nice land, to give us more eggs, more happy lives on us? No, he came to save us from sin, S-I-N. So that's the reason. Now, the reason I say it's the apostasy is this, that there is evidence, and I cannot get over the evidence, and I'm one of millions, that we are today in the grip of the beginning of a major apostasy. That is, overnight, as it were, Bernard, in a church which 30 years ago was peopled with solid lines and ranks of clergymen and nuns and priests and lay people, all believers, nobody ever questioning the fundamentals or even the accidentals. Overnight, we suddenly turn around. We have cardinals who don't believe, and we know they don't. We have bishops that don't believe, and we know they don't. We have priests that don't believe, and we know it. We have nuns that don't believe. We have whole segments of the population that have stopped going to Mass, stopped going to confession. They don't believe any longer, because there's a rule in belief which is absolutely categoric. And by an example, let me tell you what it is. If I say, "I love you," and but I never look at you. I never buy you any roses. I never buy you a meal. I don't see you at night and in the morning. I don't say good morning, good evening. The next time I tell you I love you, you can say, "Well, big joke." What does love mean? I believe in God. Well, if you believe in God, then why are you violating His rules? And why do you deny the dogmas of His church, which you know is His true church and is infallible? So they have lost their faith. They're apostatic. They're apostates. The difficulty is this, with disbelief. This, I make a comment about certain cardinals in the United States, certainly some archbishops in Canada where you live, and many, many priests and many bishops throughout the United States. When you lose your faith, do you know you've lost it, Bernard?
You don't.
You couldn't, because otherwise you get it back. They don't know. They think you're stupid because you have retained these so-called superstitions and myths. They don't know. And that's the curse of disbelief. Once He restores the gift, hey, Sarah, you can't believe any longer. You are incapable of it. And only His mercy can grasp you by the nape of the neck and lift you out of that morass. And He doesn't always do it. And remember, too, that I think we should all remember that it's very easy to lose your faith, far easier at least than you think. I need never doubt a dogma. I need never attack some rule of the church. I need never criticize the Bible, and yet lose my faith because I'm unfaithful to my vow of marriage if I'm married. my vow of celibacy if I'm a priest, my vow, my obligation not to steal if I really am a thief or robber, my obligation not to kill another human being, not to murder them. If I violate any of those things, faith is immediately chipped away. And the more I deepen into that, faith disappears. So I can leave my faith and say, no, I want to believe all those things, but I can't any longer. And the last thing to notice about faith is it's not an emotion. It's knowledge, Bernard. What happens in faith is the mind proposes a proposition. God exists. God is my creator. Jesus saved me. There is a hell. The Pope is infallible. The Church is the Church of God, outside of which there's no salvation. And my will freely locks my mind into it and says, take it, accept it, blindly, without proof. That's faith. But it's knowledge. And St. Paul says it's knowledge through a glass darkly. But that means that when I do believe, when I receive Christ in the Blessed Eucharist, when I say the Rosary, when I make the Stations of the Cross, when I go to Mass, when I fulfill my obligations in my state of life, I'm in contact spiritually and supernaturally with God, and I know Him, but I don't know what I know, unless sometimes by intuition He gives me a knowledge of it, or unless I come to the hour of death and then I suddenly see all I know and all I don't know. So it's a knowledge, and we mustn't forget that. Satan wants to corrupt that knowledge. And what he does is he tries to distract you. And we'll go in, if you wish later on, or anytime you like, we'll go into his methods of getting at your faith, how to see how to undermine it.
Let's do that right now.
Okay. The way he does it is as follows. Remember, there's a cardinal rule this idiot angel must observe, and it is that he can only touch your senses. He cannot touch your soul unless you've given it to him, unless you're possessed. And even then he has difficulties. It's a roundabout process for him. All he can do is enter your soul through the normal means. What are the normal means? It's this. You have 5 senses, your whole body, okay? And then you have inside you a thing called imagination. It's a faculty. And that faculty has pictures. And you have a memory which recalls those pictures, okay? Now, we get our normal pictures. You're sitting in this room, and if you look over to that wall there, you see a mirror, a beveled mirror. And if you look over there, there are blue books and brown books and yellow books and photographs and busts, heads of people that live here. And there are icons hanging on the wall, and there are candlesticks. All those images have already gone into your imagination, are stored away there. And with a good memory, you can pick them all out and recall them all. That's the way you get images. And because you have a mind that thinks, and you have me talking at you, you'll understand what these icons mean, what those books tell, and what those candlesticks are used for, and who are these people whose busts are up on the shelf there. So it's through images, though. Now, if he can implant images on your imagination, they're transmitted to your mind and soul. That's the only way to go. So he will plant from images on me unless I'm careful. That's why one must watch one's imagination and one's eyes. Because if you go out in the street out there, but at the present moment, and see a mother eviscerating her baby, you will not take your eyes off it. And it will be a memory you will never lose. If you turn on the boob tube, as we call it in the States, the television, and you see some obscene action between 2 people, male, female, male, female, female, whatever, the garbage we see nowadays, the pornography, you see that, and you follow all the details. It is in you. You have the image, and that is a ready tool for him to suggest to you various things that you could do. Or if you look at money in a certain way, piles of dollars or whatever it is, or gold, or somebody's very valuable necklace, and you lust after it, the image goes into you. He has the means, therefore, of working on you. And that's all he needs is one toe hold, and he has you by the neck, the scruff of the neck. So that's why it's always laughed at nowadays by the very, very advanced avant-garde in these matters. But what they used to call custody of the eyes and custody of the hands. And there is no man alive who can lay immodest hands on a woman without being tempted. He is not made of flesh. Psychologically he has to be, and vice versa. So you've got to watch how you touch and what you look at and what you listen to, because the voice can be a terrible medium of persuasion, as you and I know. And those are the means by which Satan enters. Now, it doesn't mean that you've got to go around like a barbed wire camp, watching everything, refusing to look at things, refusing to talk. No. We can develop in a child and in a man, in a woman, you can develop the habits of self-control. so that they feel the impact of something, but they easily get out of it. They're not fascinated by it. The difficulty about the television is that that's all it is, a terminal image that attracts you and fills you. There's nothing beyond it, there's no depth. That's how Satan works. He works on individuals in that way, but he's a geopolitician, and he has plans for the entire world. And his plans at that level go to the bureaucracies, go to the boardrooms, go to the CEO's office, go to the government, parliament, and the civil and federal and state governments, and there they influence individuals as a group. And we have examples of that in the United States and in Canada too. In the United States we have that as regards the approval of homosexuality, homosexual marriages, the approval of pornography as an example of art, if you please, and all the other things that are, it's by groups he works. And once you get a group of people together in a phalanx, peer pressure makes them all move in the same direction, but behind it all there's that grinning face of the old goat who's got what he wanted through his surrogates. That's how he works.
It's interesting that you mentioned the point that he works through reaching the senses, because I was in a bookstore once and I picked up a Satanist Bible, and it said that the key principle of Satanism was that of indulgence, whereas a key principle of Christianity is that of sacrifice.
That's right. That's right. You see, the two words that are whispered in the ear of everybody's soul, so to speak, by the tempter is, why not? Why not have it? Especially if it's what they call a victimless action. Nobody's hurt by it. You just enjoy yourself. You get your gold, you get your woman, you get your man, you get your boy, you get your food, you get whatever you want illegally. Why not? And it is self-indulgence. And for that phrase, why not, embodies exactly the principle that he uses, and he trains us to use with ourselves. Why not have it? You're doing no harm to nobody. It's victimless, and you have a right to it. And it belongs to John Smith or Mabel Kelly, but after all, you're just as good as them, and they won't know anyway, and it won't hurt them. And they have no right to that, and they're too stupid. So why not have it, my friend? It's self-indulgence. And it's the hardest thing in the world, Bernard, I find, in the pastoral work I do, to tell good, solid citizens, no, you have to make a sacrifice. And they'll say, well, why? I haven't committed a sin. It's not so much that. It is that if you do curb your self-indulgence, even legitimate self-indulgence, because you're not supposed to touch illegitimate self-indulgence, but if you do curb legitimate self-indulgence, like that extra chocolate eclair, self-indulgence of various kinds, once we start on that road, and I find it very hard to inculcate to a lot of good people that you make voluntary sacrifices to train yourself, because this is a warfare. And asceticism, as you know, means exercise. The original Greek word means to exercise oneself in as a gladiator, as a fighter in the amphitheater, at the games. You have to be active and curbing things just to be able to say, I can say no. That's why a total addiction to smoking or to drinking, apart from the alcohol part of it, drinking, or to chocolate, or to anything, a total addiction, there's something wrong in it, there's something unchristian, there's something sinful, at least venially sinful. You are self-indulgent, and you can't do that. Nature will come against you, and finally your soul will suffer from it.
Let's move on now to the topic of exorcism and possession. And you wrote a book called Hostage to the Devil, actually a number of years ago.
That's right. We'll bring out another edition of that, because although we still have a lot of copies to sell of the old edition and the paperback edition, we decided that we need a new preface, because things have gone... When I wrote that book in 1975, I wrote it for one reason and one reason only, Bernard. I wrote it because I found that my contemporaries in America and in Canada and Australia and Ireland had forgotten what it was all about. They didn't know what exorcism was. And there was a very funny picture called The Exorcist, based on the book by William Blatty, which is totally erroneous as regards exorcism. It's a phony exorcism, because it makes out exorcism to be a sort of a combination of Frankenstein and Dracula with a lot of green goo and windows breaking and bodies flying. And it's much more terrible and lethal than that. So I decided, since I was in exorcisms and in that field, doing a lot of work, that I would get, with permission, the transcripts of 5 to 10 exorcisms and publish them as such, with a preface. I found, of course, I could only publish 5 of them because they were lengthy. Some of these exorcisms were 400 hours. Some of them were 5 days. Some of them were long. The normal exorcism takes, and nowadays, anyway, the major exorcism takes anything up to 3 or 4 weeks. And we always take photographs, videos, and we take tape recording of the whole thing, recording. So I decided to publish that, and having published it then, in the northeast corner of America where I work in this field, we had about, I would say about 40 major exorcisms per year, but thousands of minor exorcisms. Because exorcism is divided into 2 parts. First of all, let's talk about a little bit about possession. What happens is that somebody voluntarily gives their soul to Lucifer, in this sense that they consent to be his worshipper and servitor. It sounds as if nobody would do it, but thousands do it. And we can explain the process by which that's done. Anyway, comes the point of possession. And possession means that you no longer possess your own will. It's the will only. There is a myth that the devil enters into your body. The devil can't enter into your body because he hasn't got a body to enter your body with. Do you understand me? He's not a physical shape. But do you remember Hitler, that bold, bad man Hitler? He possessed the wills and the minds of millions of Germans. He never entered their bodies. He caught their will. So if I can control your mind and your will, I possess you. And the greater the greater the extent of my possession, the greater is my hold over you. And you can see that when we had that awful man, I think his name was Steinberg, with Lisa, his common law wife, he made her be cruel to this little child who died finally. We had this awful case 2 years ago in New York. It's a case of some man dominating a woman, sometimes a woman dominating a man, so dominating that they are their servants, their slaves. That's the nature of possession, except that once the spirit has been allowed to get power in you, it is very hard to break it. You can't break away. You must do it voluntarily, by the way. There's no such thing as involuntary possession. You don't wake up one morning and say, my goodness, the devil has possessed me. That doesn't happen. You have asked him in. And he finally arrives, bag and baggage, scrip and scrippage, to stay forever. Now, that's possession. People often confuse it with what we call obsession. Obsession is where he's softening you up, if I can use that expression, about a horrible process, where you're being harassed. And it's very much like this. Supposing I start harassing you, Bernard, and I say, if you don't give me $2,000 and I know you have it in your pocket, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to injure your wife. I'm going to damage your children. I'm going to ruin your reputation. And I keep harassing you. And you get letters about this and telephone calls, and you get, I meet you suddenly in the street, I meet your wife and say, does your husband know what dangerous position he's put you into? I get the children at the playground and I say, your daddy's a very bad man. He's going to have you killed. I harass him, I harass you. And all it does is persuade you finally to do my will. And the will is, let me in, please. Let me possess you. Give me your will. That's obsession. Many people get into terrible conditions of melancholia, have to go to a shrink or a doctor. It never strikes them that what they are is they're being harassed by Satan. Sometimes it happens a man who is not very happy in his marriage, but it's fixed, he doesn't want to leave his wife, and he's harassed about another woman who is available. He's harassed and say, listen, if you don't take this woman and have an affair with her, sleep with her, have her as your mistress, you're going to break up physically. Your nerves need this. So it's harassing that point of view. So the harassment, we say harassment in America, but I was trained in England and Ireland, so I say harassment. I hope people understand the word. Harassment is another thing completely. That's obsession. You're besieged. Now possession is, once it sets in, is something from which you cannot extricate yourself. The only person that can extricate you is Christ. Christ normally doesn't do it directly. He delegates that to his apostles, and those are the bishops of the church. And the bishops must therefore authorize every exorcism. Unfortunately, nowadays, most of the bishops I know don't believe in the devil. Or if they believe in vague sort of principle of evil or something, they certainly don't believe in possession. They think you should go to a shrink. And they do send ordinary faithful to come. I've stopped saying them to certain bishops now. They send them off to see a local shrink and go to a home, rest up, get drugs. And it only makes it worse. And it's a terrible plight. But that's due to the lack of faith in bishops and priests. Then even when the bishop does believe, the parish priest doesn't, and he laughs them out of the confessional. And Bernard, I could spend my whole life just talking to people about their possession and obsession and advising them what to do. It's one of the biggest needs today. We can expand on why it's necessary today. Because there's as I told you a moment ago, when I started in 1975 in this field, there were about 40 to 50, or 50, 60, perhaps, major exorcisms per day, per year, and there are thousands of small ones. Now, there's been an increase of over 750% since 1975, and that is terrible. That is terrible. And there's no sign of this diminishing. And unfortunately, Satanism and possession have taken a very ugly turn. They've become Satanist pedophilia. Let me explain that. In other words, the Satanist, and in this country alone, in America, northern the USA, there are about, we know of 8,773 covens, that is, satanic groups, professionally devoted to worshipping Satan. And remember, that means victims, and it means black masses, and it means gross irreverence and sacrilege of the Blessed Host and the precious blood every day. It means all that. So Satanism is spread very far and wide, but it has now attained a height or depth of iniquity that rarely exceeded before. It is this: the normal Satanist group looks for a child, preferably a little boy, to be the victim, and unspeakable horrors are committed on that poor victim. They love that. That is the supreme sacrifice, because remember, Satan set out to destroy a child once, and he was foiled, and that child, Jesus, grew up to be a man and destroyed Satan's empire and sent him scurrying back to hell. And he is the enemy. So he wants to take out on as many children as he can. Hence his delight in abortion. And there are about 400 million abortions per year throughout the world that we know of. Probably many more than that. But 400 million babies are sacrificed by a knife or by cruelty, by some form of murderous cruelty, just to satisfy Satan's whim. And that's the terrible thing about mothers who wake up to the fact that they committed this sin. The trauma is so deep, sometimes you can do nothing for them at all, except pray. But Satan is being paid that tribute per year in this world. That's probably one reason why we all know there's a chastisement coming. Nothing but chastisement could clean this out. We've gone so far down the road.
Now, you mentioned that in these covens, they hold black masses.
Sure.
What are black masses?
In the entire practice of genuine Satanism, the principle is to do everything backwards. The crucifix is always there, a crucifix hung upside down. A black mass consists of taking the Roman Mass, not the Novus Ordo, because they don't believe that's a real Mass. They take the Roman Mass and they say it backwards. They start at the last Gospel and they work their way back to the beginning, except the words of consecration and the consecration itself, which is always said, if it's a genuine black mass, by a priest, an apostolate priest. So it's definitely, there's a consecration of bread and wine, and they're violated. But before you go to start a satanic mass, they make you go to confession. And in confession, what do? You confess the sins you didn't commit, because that's what you have offended Satan in. You haven't helped him along at all. You didn't commit that adultery. You didn't steal that money. You didn't kill that boy. You didn't, whatever. You didn't tell that lie you could have told. You weren't, whatever sin you could have committed, you didn't. You confessed that sin. The worshippers are always naked, and they have an altar. It's a regular mass. And on the altar they always have the naked body of the victim, whoever he or she is. And the details are too noisome and repugnant for most people to know, And even you come across somebody who's been through it, they have this blank look at the back of their eyes, burners. You know will never fade out. You know they'll always have this, even though they repent. But even in normal life, there's a part of their soul which has been withered, like your arm being withered. Nothing can be done about it. Nothing. Because the blasphemy and sacrilege of a mass, of a black mass, is so deep that once you go through that, and I've never been at one, of course, I would never go to one, but once you go through it and participate in it, then you've done something to your soul that only Christ can cure, and I don't know how many of them ever get out of it ever again. The last case we had was a woman, and she could tell us about it, but she couldn't get out of it. She had to go back. They held her with an iron grip. And no psychiatry, no psychology, no therapy could undo that. She couldn't be persuaded. She said, kill me and let me free. And she probably will commit suicide, and we can't stop it. And then Satan is served. Because as you know, suicide is the 8th sacrament for Lucifer. That's what it's called, the 8th sacrament.
Can we talk now a bit about exorcism?
Sure.
What is exorcism? Who does it? How is it done?
Well, the exorcism, first of all, must be done with the authority of a bishop who always gives it to a priest. There have been lay exorcists, by the way, in history. In times of want, bishops will take a very holy man and tell him to perform exorcism with permission. But normally it's a priest, because although many people do not realize it nowadays, once a priest's hands are consecrated, then there is a change in his soul. Once a priest's hands are consecrated, then there is a change in his soul, a spiritual change, which you will never lose again. And no matter how many priests say they're ex-priests and it's all over and it was a nice job and now they're doing something else, they will find out on the last day, if they haven't found out before they die, that their soul has been sealed away by God, and if they cover that soul with sin, that's their business, but it still belongs to God in a special way. Now, that soul of a priest, though, sinless, normally sinless, and good, and saying Mass, and doing his duty as a priest, is one thing Satan hates, because it's a reproduction of Christ. And the name that the devils in exorcism use for Christ, they never say Christ. They always say the nameless one, the great weakling, the milquetoast, always hurling insults at him, the carpenter from Nazareth. You can force them to say Christ, but then they're going to take it out on you. I did it once, and they punish you, and it's not a nice punishment at all. So you don't provoke them more than you need to. Now, so it must be a priest, and he must have authority from the bishop. I know bishops, and we've gone to them and said, look, John so-and-so or Mary so-and-so down the street in your diocese, they need exorcism, Your Honor, Your Excellency. And they've said, look, I know nothing about it, I want to know less, you have the authority, but never ask me again. They're afraid of it, they don't believe it, they're afraid not to believe it completely, they don't have anything to do with it. Anything to do with it. I know one bishop who's not like that, and he shall remain nameless, and he's regarded as an eccentric by his fellow bishops, because he believes in the devil, and believes in exorcism, and has a full-time exorcist. In the Archdiocese of New York, there's no full-time exorcist. We get them from out of town. And that's not reflecting on the cardinal here. He does believe in the devil, we know, does believe in possession, that it does occur, does believe in exorcism too. But there are difficulties against this Archdiocese appointing an exorcism that don't come from the cardinal, they come from the chancery. That means some of his subordinates will have nothing to do with it. So we have to put up with that. In other dioceses, there is no exorcist, and the bishop doesn't believe in it, and the priest don't believe in it, and there's no help for you. And I could, if I were paid, say $20 for every exorcism I was asked to do in the last 30 years, or I could retire. I could have a fleet of assistants doing them on the side. The amount of people who know they're possessed and have deliberately walked into this trap and then can't do anything about it, because there's no priest, and there's no bishop willing to help them, and the bishop laughs them out of court. And the pathetic letters I get, which I can never publish, what the bishop said to them and told what they're going to do: go away and have a good steak, a blood red steak, and have a good bottle of beer. If your wife, go and make love with her. If you haven't, well, take care of yourself, do something nice, which means go out to the local brothel or something like that. It's like a faith. Again, we come back to the apostasy, because the first thing Satan wants to make sure is that you think he doesn't exist. It's the old principle. I remember when we were being instructed in intelligence in Rome and the Vatican, because we were doing some intelligence work, they taught us, they tried to teach us anyway, some of them never picked it up, to be anonymous. So you could be in a crowd, nobody would notice you. The idea is you don't exist. We're here, but we don't exist. And that's why the great laugh Lucifer has at times is that he moves in jackboots in the boardrooms and bedrooms and in government offices and the parliament houses, and he doesn't exist. It's a myth, it's a joke. What a marvelous cover. What a marvelous cover. If Hitler or Stalin had spies of that caliber, they could have us in the bag long ago. He has us in the bag in this sense. Because he has developed a sense of humor about old Nick, and we have a portrait of a black-looking man with big ears and yellow eyes and a forked tail and cloven hooves and dirty books under his arm behind a bush saying, "Psst, come here, I'll teach you how to sin." Satan is too urbane, he's too bland, he's too clever, he won't do that. It's too studied an approach. So that's exorcism for you, and who must do it? Exorcism itself is a ceremony which the church has a fixed form for exorcism. You find it in a normal prayer book. And nowadays the prayer books don't have it precisely because the bishops dropped it. In the prayer books they were submitted them for their approval. But it's lengthy prayers, traditional prayers, calling on Saint Michael, and then there are other prayers that you put in. But a lot of it is left up to the exorcist, because at a certain moment I must turn around and say to you, the possessed person, "Who are you?" And an exorcist never obeys, never answers the question. He asks the question. He never answers the question of the possessed person. "Who are you? What do you come here to?" You can hear these people say this. "Well, why do you come here to bother me? We've done nothing to you. Leave us alone, please, Martin. Leave us alone, please. Oh, well, what do you want? Do you want women? Do you want money? Do you want food? Go away and have it. Leave us alone. What are you doing here?" Never ask the question. Say, "Who are you?" And you keep at it and you find their names. They all have a name. Ugly names, sinister names, sardonic names. Names that laugh at human beings. Names that make a joke of the loveliest things in the human body and the human mind. Always this awful, dirty touch thing. And once you do that, you have them nailed. Because then they obey that name. They answer that name. And then you proceed to find out who sent them, how do they come here, when, what's your specialty, what do you do? And it's like a dog trying to get away from you when you're after them. It's like a dog. And it'll bite your hand. It'll bite you mortally if you're not careful. And the failed exorcists are those who fell into the trap of answering questions. Because it's very interesting. And some of them are entrancing, humanly speaking. And they get tied up in it. And of course, before long, their will is going with the possessing demon's will, and they're stuck. And then other people are caught and badly injured because they do it without permission. And I know a very famous man in this country whom I helped to instruct in exorcism with a warning. He was a layman and not a Catholic. Don't attempt it. Don't do it by yourself. He did, and he's possessed. Now, when you read about the normal possessed person that's brought to an exorcist to be exorcised, they're always violent. They smell sometimes, and they're cursing, and they're a social pain in the neck to everybody, and they're a liability to their family, and they burn themselves, and they hit their head against things, they scream, and then they're most unhygienic. They go to the bathroom any place, and they shock you. It smells and all that sort of stuff. They're not doing that to hurt you. They are like the baby who's hungry, can't tell you, and is hitting its head against the ground. Do you ever see a baby do that? When they're really, it's the way they have a signaling. They're trying to create pain to absorb pain in their tummies, which are empty, supposedly. But they're also signaling. When you see that, you know a baby saying, "I'm hungry." Similarly with a possessed person who's misbehaving themselves, as I've just described, in these 1001 awful, disgusting ways. Disgusting, Vernon, is the only word. The smell, the sight, the sound, the words, the actions. I mean, they dehumanize you. You never recover from it. Not really. It takes away a bit of your soul. and leaves that with God until you get back to heaven, and he reintegrates it. But they're saying, help me, I'm in trouble. They can't describe it. Some of them attempt to, and then they shut up, and then the devil takes over, the possessing spirit takes over, and they then proceed to act in another coy way. I remember once being asked to interview a woman who was a paraplegic in a bath chair, in a wheelchair, and she spoke long about the wounds of Jesus, and about Jerusalem, and about the Pope, and then proceeded to try and seduce me in a very subtle way. So it was only Satan using words that meant nothing at all, just using Christian words. Now, there is another form of possession which is terrible, and it's called perfect possession. I've only met a bare half dozen of perfectly possessed people. You see, when possession takes place, although you can't break from it, you know. And if grace of God comes to you, or if something happens that jogs your mind, with the grace of God finally, and you want to get out of it, you can finally get out of it. And if God sends you the grace, probably he's going to send you the means of being exorcised. But some people don't want to. Some people actually want to be possessed. They want to be holy Lucifers. I've met them. Believe me, it's as real as the nose on your face. And when they're perfectly possessed, they're completely urbane and calm and clean and efficient. They're good doctors, they're good lawyers, they're good architects, they're good bankers, they're good painters, they're good artists, they're good dancers. They're beautiful people. Die schöne Leute, as the Germans used to say. But they're not schöne at all. They're not beautiful at all. But they're perfectly possessed. Except now and again, in an off moment, when they don't think you're looking at them, you see this face. You see this. I knew one very well in England. No, Ireland he was, I knew, but I met him in England later. And at first go over, it just seemed to be sort of a very metallic sort of a voice and a sort of a very sort of business-like way of talking. It wasn't much of the milk of human kindness, but I've known so many people who know milk of the human kindness, as Shakespeare has it, that it doesn't surprise me in this hard world of ours. But now and again, and I got to know him, we were working together on a project, and therefore I got to know his movements and the way he dressed, and he used to wear perfume, some eau de cologne, perfectly legitimate, and I knew the way he talked and the sound of his voice and his quirks of raising his head like that when he was thinking, looking up to the left. And I got to know him. And once or twice he came in to see me. Once or twice I saw him alone in a brown study. He didn't know I was there. And I said to myself, I don't know that man. That's an alien. That's alien. And finally it hit my belly that he was totally alien inside. And I had a conversation with him about it. And since I was what I was, he opened up somewhat, but in a very veiled way, but he told me. But there's this alien touch. You suddenly find out, I don't know this man. I thought I did. He's utterly alien. And it's this look. It's a frightening look. And and most people when they meet it just say, oh, he's crazy, or he's a pain in the neck or something. They don't bother about it. But they're perfectly possessed. You never touch them. You walk away from it. Never try anything to do with them, because they're completely gone. They've given in completely, and they're Faust. They've signed the document for their soul to go, and it's a terrible thing. The extent of it is very big today. As I say, we have about over 8,000. It's 842. 8,042 was the last count I saw. And these are worshipping covens composed of not ignorant men and women, not people who are stupid, on the road, homeless, jobless, No, these are doctors, lawyers, architects, brokers, painters, dancers, nuns, priests, cardinals, bishops.
Some of these people are in powerful positions then?
My dear man, the last coven we had to deal with indirectly through this woman. I mean, it was a galaxy of names. If you want anything done in medicine or in finance in New York or Albany, just be in the coven. Absolutely top-flight people and perfectly well-behaved in normal life. Family members, family men and women, society members. They were known to people, and some of them are very, very well-known names in their world, the part of the world in New York, and probably in Washington too. I It's only the perfectly possessed that frighten my soul. I met some of them in Washington and some of them elsewhere in this country. And they all frighten me because they're completely dedicated. It's like meeting a complete and utter Russian spy, or a spy for the Soviet Union in those bad days. In America, once you meet them, you know, they're going to betray everything without mercy. Similarly with them too. It is an unpleasant thing. And my advice to anybody about it is this: know about exorcism, know about possession, know how to avoid the devil's inroads, but do not touch it otherwise. It is mucky, dirty, insalubrious, unhealthy, inhuman, and not to be thought about. It's like the old priest who instructed me originally in Cairo said to me, Malachi, he said, this whole thing is like a bowel movement. We have to deal with it, but he said it's not to be thought about. He was an Irishman. That was his way of putting it. It's his way of saying that don't touch it, keep away from it, unless you have to. Now you must inform yourself, and therefore some book like mine is useful to you, very useful because it's above board. Some of the language is hard to carry, and I don't advise certain people who ask me for the book. I say, no. When I know them, I say, no, don't read the book yet. Wait for a couple of years, especially if they're young, and especially if they're very sort of tender and they can't face brutal facts very easily. Some people can't. So I don't advise them to read the book, but I say to anybody, you should know about it and know the details, but you needn't go into any great. And above all, watch out the trap laid for you. Don't use the Ouija board. Don't attend spiritual seances. Don't use cards to tell fortune. Don't do transcendental meditation. Don't do Ron Hubbard's course. You will end up, one way or the other, with harassment at least, if not possession. And you won't know it, because you've been trained by these systems to do it. But so don't. Keep away from it.
Why are only certain priests delegated to be exorcists? Why can't just any priest do an exorcism?
Strictly speaking, any priest could, if he's delegated. But experience has shown the following, Bernard. The typical exorcist is not a very poetic-minded character. He's not flowery. He's not a first-class humanist. He's usually a very stolid character with what we call good moral judgment. You know the type? Sometimes they're boring, by the way, very boring, because they're straight and clear-minded, and for them the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and they don't indulge in wild superstitions or wild romanticism or, as I say, in poetry. Number one. Number two, they have to be of proven moral character. And that's one of the reasons why young priests can't be, because when you're young, you haven't proved yourself. I think that by the age of 45 or 50, if you have careful superiors, careful bishops, careful parish priests, they know you. They know you're predictable. You're predictable. Number two. Number three, they must have good theology, because without good theology, you can be deceived. You can undertake an exorcism of a person, man or woman, boy or girl, and the answers you get, if you're not able to judge them, they can deceive you. That the exorcism is done, that there's no devil there, there's no possession there, you can be deceived. So they're the first three qualifications. And not everybody fits into that. In fact, if you take a roster of priests nowadays that I meet, the young priests coming out of the seminaries, there's one man. He's going to be ordained next June. With time, he might develop into it. But we don't breed this type of animal any longer. Then you see, there's also this about that many priests, and I know them, have refused. Why? Bernard, there's an unconscious and invisible toll on the human spirit once you do exorcisms. What is it like? Well, let me give you the example, say, of a father and a mother. You must know hundreds of fathers and mothers. I certainly do. And when I talk to them, and they have loved their children and reared their children, now they're grandmothers, they're very near becoming grandfathers and grandmothers. You find them continually saying, oh no, I gave that son, I gave him all I got, I gave him everything. And they'll tell you what they did in order to bring him to where he succeeded, or his daughter, or her daughter, their mother and father talking about them. They're always saying, implying that in order to love them properly as their father or their mother, they had to give of themselves. And they're not talking about money. They also gave money. They're talking about time. They gave time. or their embrace, their kiss, their encouragement. They mean all those things too. What they really mean is they've given something of themselves. And I remember one father said to me about a son at West Point at the graduation, and the boy was feckless. He was so happy over his graduation that he couldn't come back and tell his father about certain ceremonies that father wanted to hear about, because the father himself had graduated 50 years before that, and he wanted to hear his son tell about the secret celebrations that the cadets have that the officers have when they graduated. And he said to me, sort of almost with tears in his eyes, he said, "You know, I'll never know what happened." He said, "No, he will never tell me." And he said, "I gave him. I can't take back what I gave him, because I gave him part of me." And it's true. And a mother will know that she has invested so much love in that child that she could never do it again. And if you really love a woman as a man, or if a woman loves a man as her husband, once they give that love, you can't do the same. It's only done once, really once. And then you haven't got to give. You give a part of yourself. There's this peculiar transmission of the soul in its fruitful capacity. Now, an exorcist has to do that. Every time you do an exorcism or assist at an exorcism, you diminish your what will I call it? It's like as if it's something like that. If you worked so hard with your arm that you strain it beyond, it will never get back to its original pristine condition of being a good strong arm or a good strong foot. Some vitality, some spiritual vitality goes away. And exorcists I know, when they chat, they normally sort of speak about it as that it's a part of them God has taken away and have to wait till they die. And the old exorcists I know are men who are very denuded of self and very calm. There's great composure. Peace is always the result of good exorcism. Peace, great peace, deep peace. When a person is exorcised and they come out of it and they're cured, Bernard, there's a look on their face that you'd pay gold to see, because it even communicates itself to you. It's a majestic composure. They've suddenly woken up to the fact that they're children of God, they're clean. And I think this because normally your angel accompanies you and has that sort of an atmosphere around him and communicates it unconsciously to you. And they have it back. And they no longer have this shadow, as one man described it to me, always at the side of your eyes. You can never see it except on the side of your eyes, but you know it's there. And it possesses you, it holds you. You do what it says, whether it's masturbation or stealing or killing or lying or what. It's always there. It has to do this, and you do it automatically. It's slavery. It's slavery. Now, so that's why it's limited. Thirdly, then, there's the fact that so that people won't do it. I know people who said, "No, I won't, Your Grace. You can fire and complain to Rome, defrock me, but I'm not going to do an exorcism." I remember one man just wouldn't. And the bishop said, "Why?" He said, "Because I can't do it." He said, "I'll fall. I love lots of things I read in these books." He's a very honest man. He's still a priest and a good priest, but he knew his own weakness. I've known intellectual priests who said, "No, I can't do that because I'd be trapped. I'll make a mistake." It's a different type of man. It's a very solid, it's the type you find engineers are. Good, solid engineers, you know, they look at the thing, they measure the planks, they can measure them out their eyes, and they deal with hardcore figures, and there's no airy-fairy castles in their mind. They're very compromised. So it's that type of mind. Now, doubtless anybody can. I knew one exorcist who was a young man, and he was forced into the position because of his bishop and the subject, the exorcia, as they say, but he was too fine, and he died. Well, it broke him. It broke him in two. He just couldn't take the horror, because you must be able to stand a terrible stench. I'm not saying physically, that too, but in the nostrils of your soul, if there's such a thing. That's the way of putting it. The disgust. You're dealing with something which is disgusting to your nature, and people should realize that when something is disgusting like that to your nature, it means Christ within you is disgusted. It's Christ if you have him with you. Just as if you are revolted by cruelty and are sad at human iniquity, that is Christ expressing his sadness and his disgust at it. So if you have that. But for some people, it doesn't give them the strength to control that, and that you have pity on them. And the bishop doesn't force them. If the bishop believes, that's the difficulty. So that's why they limit it. And then the last principle the church has is never let a whole crowd of fellows go around exorcising, because there could be chaos. You know, there was a time in Europe when everybody was considered to be a witch who wasn't a nun, or something like that, or didn't give good contributions to the local cathedral. So you had crowds of friars and Dominican friars and Franciscan friars going around exorcising people ad lib. And of course there's an abuse. And they always condemned a lot of wrong people, wrongly, they condemned people.
During exorcisms, is holy water used, or is it composed purely of prayers?
We don't understand. God hasn't given us the means of knowing. But you see, God's presence in the world comes in various ways. His chief presence is that he maintains it in existence. His power runs right through everything, through the angels. The steward angels, as they call them, 6 choirs of the 9 angels, of the 9 choirs, have nothing to do but to maintain that world in equilibrium. The world of matter, the world of mind, the world of movement, the world of oceans and lands, and the whole thing. That's one presence he has. Another presence that God has in this life amongst men is the sacramental presence. His body and blood and soul and divinity are present in that tabernacle. Now, a third presence is through sacramentals. What are those? Those are things which the church has had from the very beginning. A crucifix, especially blessed and hanging on the wall, a rosary beads, a chaplet, say the Simon Stock, the scapular, holy water, holy bread, whatever is, God gets a special blessing from God, and therefore becomes a special part of the incarnation of divinity in this stuff and matter of our world. Holy water is like that. The power of sacramentals is traditionally known to be limited by your faith. It's like the story of the old woman, you know, who had this awful hill to climb up and to go down before she got to the church. She used to want to go to Mass every day. And she, finally the priest said to her, Katie, make a novena. Christ said faith will move mountains. Make a 9-day novena, and you can shift the mountain with your faith. So she did for 9 days. The story goes, it's an Irish story, which probably never happened, but anyway, or perhaps it did, but in another way. And finally, she used to look out every morning to the mountain and say, you'll be gone in 9 days, or you'll be gone in 8 days, you'll be gone in 7 days. And the night before she went to bed, she looked out of the mountain and said, you won't be there in the morning, I'll have a flat walk over to Mass. Well, when she got up in the morning, the mountain was still there. So she said, I knew you'd be there all the time. She really didn't believe. So, the power of the sacramental of making this novena, and novena is a sacramental of another kind, wasn't hard work. You must believe, must have faith. And you've always noticed the saints, whether it's Padre Pio or whoever, John Bosco or St. Ignatius, they always use something. Christ himself, remember, he used to mix mud with his spittle and put it in your ears and, in order to show that sacramentals had power if you have the faith. And he had the power and he had the faith. So holy water is used, and holy water is very powerful. And as you know, there's a French expression, when you want to say somebody's very uncomfortable, you say it's like Lucifer in a holy water font. And it does they dislike holy water very much. There's like crucifixes too, but holy water and Lourdes water. That Lourdes water is very, very powerful water, we find. But holy water, any holy water is, there should always be holy water in the house. And we should bless ourselves with it. But in an exorcism, it's used extensively. And it doesn't burn them, it just drives them crazy. In the exorcism, the picture, the priest shook some water on them, and it's sort of as if it was burning natural glycerin or something. But it wasn't that. It's that any approach of divinity is torture. Is torture. So yes, holy water is used, and crucifix is used, and holy candles are used. Sometimes there's a danger with those because they're blown out, they're kicked, they're thrown, they're spat upon, they're split in 3 ways. I've seen candles split down like zigzag, like as if somebody ran a knife through them. Things you can't describe to people. The temperature in the room can change, can go from freezing cold, 5 below, to 100 degrees within a drop of a hat.
So very dramatic things can happen during exorcisms.
Very. If the demon is very angry and very powerful, if you make mistakes, or if there's a big prize at stake, then you can expect a dirty struggle. Sometimes the demon is extremely stupid. You can trap it, and maliciously, because you're the killer, or it's the killer. There's no mercy, there's no humor. There's sardonic, schadenfreude, as the Germans say, laughing at somebody's hurt, but there's no real humor or wit in it at all. So yes, holy water is used, and a lot of other things are used too, like that.
Now, are exorcisms sometimes performed on places or objects?
Yes, you can exorcise a place or an object. A room is obsessed. A room is possessed. A room can be obsessed too, just as what they call the poltergeist syndrome, you know. It's on its way to possession. Why that takes place, we don't know exactly. We have guesses, and the church has always had reasons for thinking it, theologians have, and then saints have given us revelations, but there's nothing dogmatically fixed why places are obsessed, but we know they are possessed and obsessed. Usually there are places where there's been a gross injustice, or there's a murder, or there's a body buried unknown, or there's been a severe desecration of the Holy Communion or the Mass, or there's been a violation of a nun or a priest, or it's a funny thing. You know, it works both ways. You know, Our Lady, when she appeared in Spain, in Garabandal, at one stage she told the children to collect everybody's rosary beads and she blessed them. And they put them all into a basket, and then she brought it to Our Lady, and Our Lady blessed them all. Then the child came out and was giving back all the rosary beads back to their owners. And she knew instinctively, by divine help, who to give the rosary beads to, except that when she was leaving Our Lady said, "There's a powder compact in there, don't give it to the person." Because it was a pyx. It was stolen and made into, if you know what a pyx is, it's the little box where the priest carries the host in. That belongs to my son. So it was a sacramental that had this mark forever, that had once been used for the Blessed Sacrament, and now had been used, turned into a woman's powder compact with a little powder puff in it. So it does affect them physically. And I bet you, Bernard, if you walked into some of the areas I've had to walk into in this world, especially in Europe and the Middle East, but also in America, you'd know instinctively no sacramental had ever entered. There'd never been any holiness there. And the moment you sprinkle holy water there, and pray, there's some immediate lifting of the atmosphere. I don't know what it is. Or else you get out fast. It's the world is either full of God or it's full of the devil. There's no in between. There's no neutral terrain.
Let's take a look at some of the ways now that Satanism is spreading throughout our society, so here in North America or in Europe.
Well, we're into a new phase, a completely new phase. That's our opinion in this matter. I'll tell you why we call it a new phase. There's no doubt about it that from before the time of Christ, especially during the time of Christ, as the Gospels testify, there has always been possession. Always been possession. And always been exorcism too. The Jewish religion did give a means of exorcism to its priests and wise men. And Christ himself, he had, being Lord and Master, he could expel devils like that. And remember, he cleaned out 7 devils out of Mary Magdalene. That's a lot of devils. Now, we've always had that. And the Middle Ages, and right down to the Renaissance, and then to the Enlightenment, as they call it, this thing continued. Then, of course, belief in the devil dropped out, and belief in the church dropped out, and Catholicism was limited to certain countries. And then the scientists set about proving there was no such thing as the devil, no such thing as possession, therefore. So the whole idea dropped out. In the meantime, what we have found out is happening. And by the way, this rests as much on the testimony of demons which we exorcise and have to speak and say what they're doing in life. Because sometimes the people who come for exorcism, and this, I must keep my mouth shut on this point, are high up in government or finance. And they've influenced about a lot of people in a lot of countries. And you'd be appalled sometimes by the near accidents we ran with great men and great women. But about that we can't speak an awful lot. But know that it's a fact. That because from all that testimony, from all that factual situation, as well as from what the church tells us, it's quite clear that what Lucifer has concentrated on today is the group organization. There's no doubt about it that running right through our society, say take my own country here, the USA, running right through its society, especially in the public institutions. And by that I mean government offices at the city, state, and federal level. Washington. There's no doubt about it that Lucifer has acquired a phalanx of servitors, of servants in these places who will do his bidding and do his bidding automatically. Some of them I've met, and some of them are completely possessed. They do his will from morning until night, and they have a very good time. They have a great success. They have a very good life as far as material things go. So it's influencing groups to do his will. And to do his will in this matter means de-Catholicizing the church, ridding public life of any semblance of religion at all, any religion, not merely the Roman Catholicism. But Roman Catholicism is a special enemy because he knows, have something the others haven't got. And, you know, Bernard, somebody has said it, and it's true, and it's not a Catholic who said it, if tomorrow the Roman Catholic Church were wiped out completely, the rest of Christianity will fall to pieces. It's the lodestone that holds them all together, finally, and it's the norm by which they define themselves. So the mode today is different. It's no longer individuals. It's now whole groups, it's whole governments, it's whole schools, it's whole foundations, its whole organizations dedicated to promoting the will of Satan along the sexual line, along the art line, along the historical line, along the statecraft line, along the economic line, along the line of, say, junk bonds. It's a funny thing. This is his tactic, and this means that in his plans, in Lucifer's plans, there's a showdown coming, and he's marshalling all the forces possible, and he's succeeding so far. He's got so many servants because he grants them success. They get success. You see, what you and I forget is this, that when you're normally doing your work, Bernard, and I'm doing my work, and we're doing it decently and as good as we can, and as sinlessly as we can, we're getting light from God continually. They call it Lumen Christi, light of Christ. We get it in our brains, our intelligence. Similarly, if I'm serving Satan, he has his own light. He will enlighten them, and they have their own intuitions, their own instructions, their own light. He gives light and makes them succeed and gives them their pleasures and gives them their successes. Oh yes, so he's a good leader from that point of view, except that they end up finally burnt to a crisp for eternity. But he does endow them with it, and that's why they're very intelligent. Don't misunderstand, don't underestimate them. They're formidable enemies. And whether it's in the ACLU or the Planned Parenthood Federation or some of the out-and-out homosexual organizations, which even the ordinary homosexual you meet says, my God, that's disgusting. You know, he's got his servitors, and they are very faithful to him.
And it permeates our whole society, even in the music, for example.
Oh, above all in the music, there's nothing more influential than music. I know that, you see, but what is difficult for normal citizens to imagine is this. And this holds for Canada or for USA or Australia or England or Europe. It holds for those areas because that's where Satan is most active at the present moment, according to our statistics. It's very difficult for them to realize that over a period of time, hard to calculate, but certainly in the region of about 150 years, coming to a culmination in the middle of our century, there has grown up an organizational institution kept very private, with membership lists, with centers, with leaders, with a bank balance, with funds, and with great influence, that, like an octopus, is spreading through every one of our public institutions. And whether it's the armed forces, or whether it's the federal government, say here, or the government in Canada, in Toronto, or whatever it is there, and it is planning things. And you can only account for some of the things that are happening in our world by presupposing such a thing exists. We know it exists otherwise. But you'd be led to conclude there was something like that there merely by watching the phenomenon take place. There must be something coordinating all that because it's all moving in one direction. The direction is terrible, Bernard. You probably are too young. I'm not putting rank on you. I'm complimenting you to know that you're used to change today. I mean, there's a change every week and every month. But when I was young, there was no such thing. Every decade was a tin tap of the previous decade. Somebody has so arranged world affairs that now it's in flux always. We have been forced to get used, to get accustomed to change, perpetual change. That's not only in our politics, but in our lives. The job system today requires you to travel. You have to travel. The job system requires the husband to go to Seattle and the wife to stay in Oklahoma, because that's the only way they can make their money work.
And people change jobs every 2 or 3 years now.
And they move. Or he moves or she moves, the family stays behind. I know that's an arrangement that takes place today. That's why I have I think not half our families, but it's near one half our families are one-parent families. But there's this change. And then another change which has been instituted, this will show the extent of this octopus, is this, that we have now got used to the fact that people will wear clothes, slacks, men and women, jeans, which will show all the contours of their bodies. And we have to get used to that. And the videos, the advertisements you see, whether you're in television over there or here, they are showing things which my grandmother and grandfather would fall to pieces over. We have become we don't blink an eyelid at it any longer. A nude, a naked, a very revealing dress, a male body almost showing all the relevant parts of it. We don't care. We've been made to get used to that. We say that's what they do nowadays. Language, the 4-lettered words that are in English. You just can't afford to be shocked if you're going to listen to TV. You can't afford to be shocked because they're going to use every one of them. They've made you used to it. Another effect. A third effect is that now, if you lift your eyebrows at a dinner table, certainly in America, except in very fundamentalist circles, if somebody says, well, Joe is living with Mary now for the last 3 years and they're very happy, you're supposed to take that like as if he said about Joe that Joe has got a haircut. It's perfectly normal. If he says that, well, Joe and Michael decided that they were best buddies and they could give life support to each other, they love each other very much, meaning they have a homosexual union, you're supposed to, oh really? That's bravo. I mean, you're not supposed to, or not common at all. You've got to get used to it, lad, because that's the way it is.
And anybody who objects to that will immediately be ostracized.
But that every day, Bernard, to let our listeners know, every day on the international stock markets, say of Tokyo, Singapore, Berlin, Dusseldorf, Paris, Rome, Tokyo, London, New York, about $600 billion are sloshed around in various stock deals, perfectly legitimate. And there are hundreds of thousands of small investors all over the world. But there are only about up to 100 who deal every day on those markets, on all those markets, with about $20 to $40 billion. They know what's going on. They decide who lives and who dies. They govern money. They govern the flow of capital and capital goods to each country, without which country dies, on a daily basis. They decide, and we are convinced, firmly in the camp of Lucifer. They serve his purpose, to create a world without God, and a world which is inhuman in our sense of the word. They have a lot of power, and unfortunately they're going to try and, when we spoke a moment ago about the changes imposed on us in our eating, in our clothes, in the way what we hear on television, what we hear on radio, what we hear in films, what we hear in drama, we're talking about that. Remember those changes that were forced on us, and the clothes they were forcing on us. All those things are planned, because that's where the intelligence is, and it is definitely satanic. It's to wipe out Christian civilization. The devil has very little time to do it, and he has almost succeeded.
So Christianity is going to have no role in this New World Order?
None. Paul VI, even poor Paul VI, who died in 1978, said that probably the church will be reduced to an infinitesimally small part of humanity. No influence whatever. Everybody would have walked over it, like countries like ours walked over Belgium in history and left it flat. They've walked over this whole the society that we created for exorcism. They've walked over it. They've simply walked beyond it. And there are several organizations that have failed to, because we're not able to manage it. We're not able to manage it. And these people are too powerful.
This is the end of tape number 1. The discussion will continue on tape number 2.
Does the struggle between good and evil enter into the church directly? Can Satan have an influence even inside the church?
From our experience, we have to say yes to that question. It's a difficult question to answer theoretically. Not that we don't know the theoretic principles behind Satan's penetration. You see, Satan is free to penetrate everywhere that human beings exercise free will. The book of Job has the classic example of that. At the beginning of the book of Job, Satan is confronted by God, and God says to him, "Look at my servant Job, just a man you cannot find in the land." And Satan says to God in the story, which is only a story from that point of view, "Give me my chance, I will make him fall." And God says something like the equivalent of, "It's a free country. If you can make him fall, take him as your prey." And the principle is that anyone who is human, who has a free will, is liable. Now, that's all the apostles and all the bishops and all the priests and all the popes are free agents, so they can be tempted. Secondly, there's this, that Christ, speaking to the apostles on the Lake of Galilee after his resurrection, said to them all, "Satan has wanted to sieve you all like a man sieves wheat and chaff." And then turning to Peter, he says, "And you especially." So he told them they'd be tempted. And the history of the church, or of churchmen as such, tells us that temptation and giving way to temptation has been the law of churchmen from the very beginning. Even Peter himself yielded to fear, which was a temptation, and denied his Lord 3 times. And so there's no doubt about it, Satan can penetrate the church. What we must emphasize today, though, Bernard, is that the ordinary penetration of the church through its members by Satan has been demonstrated amply in the past. What we have never found in the history of the church since the ascension of our Lord, and that was when the church was really set up, the Pentecost and the Ascension, is that this is the first time we have undeniable proof that Satan has been enthroned in the church by some of the church's own churchmen, and that the citadel, which before was besieged with small breaches in it and small little traitors, now has Satan enthroned within it. And Paul VI, who ended up a very miserable pope, although he did his best, in the end of his life he gave an interview to his great French friend Jean Guiton, who later published it when he died. And at one stage Jean Guiton said to him, "Holiness, Sanctité, what do you think is the fate of the church going to be? You have said that the smoke of Satan has in the church and is wafting around the sanctuary altar." And Paul VI said, "Yes," he said, "mon fils, my son, we have said that, and it is true. The smoke of Satan is in the sanctuary, and probably Catholics are destined to become an infinitesimally small part of humanity due to the presence of Satan." And that means that in the mind of Paul VI, because they went on talking, Catholicism and Catholics in the church will be marginalized completely, because their impressive leaders would be taken over by the temptations of the devil. And what we must remember is this, that sure, there have always been temptations in the church for churchmen, for gold, for sensuality, for pride and ambition. But this is the first time that a new assault has been launched. The assault is very simple. Just be like the rest of men. Adore a general God, be good, be compassionate men, be humanitarian, join man in building man's earthly world, earthly habitation in his world. And this is the first time this is cottoned on. And I must tell you that there's a bland note in documents coming out from bishops, the least you can say about them is that, and from Rome to a certain human gallantry, a certain romanticism that has nothing to do with salvation. It is, let's share with humanity, humanity's labors. Let's join with man in helping man to solve his problems. The church's aim is not to solve economic problems of man or political problems. The only victory the church has, and the only victory Christ promised to the church, was when any man dies or any woman dies, they don't go to hell. They either go to purgatory or heaven, because the church has conveyed Christ's grace to them. It is undeniable that today the Satan has entered the church in a very positive way. If you ask me further details on that, I must confess to you, Bernard, that I do not intend, and from where I sit, with my responsibilities, I do not intend to burden the imagination and the memory of your listeners with the details. But I must say this much, that Satan has been welcomed. Lucifer, the enemy of Christ, the tempter of Adam and Eve, he who hates Our Lady, he whose head she has crushed and will crush, he who finally will be blown away by the breath of Christ's mouth in the last day, who's responsible for all souls who went to hell, he has been successfully received and enthroned within the citadel. We are now not looking out at the enemy is among us.
In your book, The Keys of This Blood, indicated that within Rome itself there exists a super force that has paralyzed the governing machinery of the church, even in the Vatican.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. There is this force which is at the present moment irremovable. I was going to say undislodgeable, but irremovable is a better English word. And this is where, again, one's faith in Our Lady of Fatima comes in, because she said so. And she said that only I can save the church, because that is what my Son has willed, not because of her own choice, but because that's what Christ has chosen, that she shall be the one to come finally and save the church before the final disaster. Because if you read carefully what Our Lady told Lucia, you get the strong picture that things are going to get so bad, so many of the elect will lose their faith, so many people who now believe will finally give up in despair and commit suicide or be taken away by Satan as his prey, so much so that if she did not step in, nobody would be saved. And it reminds us of that awful phrase the gentle Christ used once when he's speaking to the apostles. They must have fallen out of their pants when they heard him say, when the Son of Man comes back to earth, he was talking about his resurrection and his disappearance, and then he's coming back in the last day. When I come back, am I going to find any faith on earth? You know, Bernard, that frightens me, because I consider myself to be strong in faith. And I now see that Christ would envisage in that sentence that I who think I'm strong in faith, I might be dislodged. And that frightens my soul, because I want to go to heaven, I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to burn forever, number one. And number two, I want to be in possession of eternal beauty and truth forever, because that's my being was made for that. I don't want to become the devil's booty, the devil's prey. So the danger is that today, because the magisterium has a muffled voice, the office still exists, it has a muffled voice, an uncertain voice. The churchmen who are supposed to voice the magisterium have uncertain voices. They're affected in their faith, they're affected in their outlook, they're affected in their performance through fear and through what Our Lady called disequilibrium of mind. She said to Lucia once, my child, don't be surprised if the best minds suffer from an imbalance at a certain moment, wonk and waver. And because that is so, there's a great crisis of faith in the church, and there's no point of recall, there's no rappel to order, there's no leading voice really talking in the church today, inspiring us all. It isn't there. So we're under siege very badly. And I'm not a pessimist or an optimist. I'm a realist. And if I look at the question of seminaries, if I look at the question of bishops, if I look at the question of the nuns, if I look at the question of theologians, Bernard, there's no light at the end of the tunnel yet. We're in the tunnel, and we're going to be in it for quite a while. There's no salvation coming so far. We've just got to weather this as best we can and keep our faith. And you know, the extraordinary phenomenon today is this, that when I was young, for instance, I'm 70, remember that, even if you were inclined to wonky and to waver and to divagate from the straight and narrow path, there was a community to support you. Your family, even the local cop, the local teacher, the schools, the library, your friends, the families, celebrations locally. There was a community. Today, there is no Catholic community anywhere. You have groups of 1 and 2 and 3 and 10. There's me on you and you on me, and we are our friends together. And there's other groups that meet, and it's one-on-one today. Small communities. There's no such thing as a unified parish. There is probably in the whole of of America. I suppose there are about 10 parishes that I know of, certainly, who are really united parishes. But there's an extraordinary priest there, an extraordinary parish priest in every one of those. And when he dies, the bishop is going to strip it. He has said so, because he dislikes all tradition. He wants it to be modern. So we have this condition today that we're all separated and broken up in small little bits. And that's what Christ has willed as our crucifixion. I always remind people, though, that when we say that, what we should remember is this, that all the fathers agree that the history of the church will reproduce exactly the history of Christ. And as far as I can see, if you want to draw a picture, a word picture of today, according to the image of Christ and his passion, you should say that, well, we have the crown of thorns, certainly, because we have those theologians on top of our back, Richard McCormick down here, and Gandon up in Canada, and people all over the place, and they're sticking thorns into our head, and they're shaming us, and they're torturing us, and we're being scourged at the pillar. Yeah, we're being scourged because of our disgraceful behavior. Our pedophiliac priests and our Gucci nuns and our apostate bishops, and I could name off several dioceses in this country of ours, like, for instance, the Diocese of Albany. I consider it to be an apostate bishop. And the Diocese of Milwaukee with Bishop Wheatland, Archbishop Wheatland, and the others, and I think they probably themselves would agree to it. But this is all scourging of our public body. But we haven't yet started going to Calvary, carrying our cross, and we haven't reached Calvary, nor have we been crucified. Look at the lovely time that's ahead of us, Bernard, if we're going to follow that pattern of our Lord's sufferings.
That means that there's going to be a resurrection.
Of course there's going to be a resurrection, and we will be resurrected. And we will be resurrected in glory, but after our crucifixion and death. And we have to suffer that, I'm afraid. And once that is over, once Our Lady comes on her appointed time, giving us the signal that she has promised to give us, then we can lift our faces to the east, because it's from the east our salvation will come. That's in brief that is how Satan is working at the present moment. And there is no gainsaying his power in the church on account of the unfaith he has sown. He has so many supporters within the church now.
And let's take a look at the manifestations of this support that Satan has within the church. Let's say heresies like liberation theology or this New Age philosophy. Yeah. Could you maybe describe briefly some of the worst ones?
Well, I'll tell you, you've named two principal ones. Liberation theology, of course, was, as you know, concocted with one deliberate reason in mind. In the 50s they did this, sat down carefully in Panama City, a group of people, Catholic theologians and Marxists, and they worked out the following, that there was no way you could touch the Catholicism directly of Latin American peoples. They were just their culture, their very names, their salutations, the names of the week, everything they did, even when they cursed, it implied religion. So they said, why don't we use Catholic terminology in a Marxist sense, but still using it? So they set out to speak about La Virgen, the Virgin, who is the mother of revolutionaries, Madre de la Revolución, and speak about Christ, the bread of the workers. But when they said El pan de los trabajadores, they meant Christ, the bread of the workers, which we make in our factory, we've taken from the capitalists, and so on. They Marxized every Christian concept, or they Christianized every Marxist concept. And it was a very subtle thing, because it wiped out, there was no such thing as personal sin. The only sin they want to liberate themselves from was capitalism, Yankee capitalism. That was the enemy. But liberación didn't mean any liberation from sin by the blood of Christ. That didn't matter. And you know, at the famous meeting of the liberation theologians in Brazil in 1987, with 12 bishops and I don't know how many priests and how much lay people, everybody went and trod on the crucifix, because they said the crucifix and the passion of Jesus, this enervates our fighting revolutionary power. And they have started off on that line. Now, unfortunately, see, liberation theology has fallen very evil days, because Moscow has ceased to support them. And the great vindicator and champion of liberation theology in this part of the world, Mr. Castro, is sinking beneath the waves with a stiff upper lip, and he's on his way out slowly. So they have, but it has created terrible damage, because while it's now seeping out of Latin America slowly, it's not out of it yet, It's still ensconced in North America in the seminaries and in England, where they're all liberation theologians. And you dare speak to them about going to confession, they say, for what? There's no such thing as personal sin. Sin is social sin, sinful structure, sinful governments. And we're not sinful governments, just the government we have is. So that's one great sin, one great heresy, and it's still there and it's trouble to the church. The second one is more pervasive, and it's the New Age. Bernard, you've heard about political correctness. It's the rage now. In New York, in Los Angeles, in California, in down south, in Dallas and forth, all over the United States, in our courts, in our newspapers. There are certain things you cannot say, otherwise you are not politically correct and socially acceptable. You cannot, for instance, be openly advocating, for instance, celibacy. Oh, you don't do that. That's medieval, and it's superstitious, and it produces all these pedophiliac priests. And that's the argument against it. Priests should marry, and have the option at least to be able to marry, and therefore they get rid of their bad instincts. They wouldn't become deviants. Another thing political correctness forbids is any attack on homosexuality as a sin. It's not. It's an alternative way of life. Any attack on abortion? No, it's a legitimate constitutional right of every red-blooded American man and woman to have an abortion, or to procure an abortion. The New World is built on one principle. The New World is built on the principle that man, if left alone by religion and religionists and hierarchical authorities, is able to build a paradise on earth. And you want to worship the Virgin? Fine, worship her, but worship her with us. Let us all share it and be sane. Have an even plain service on which we can all worship as we want to worship, but leave the other alone. Don't say he's wrong. He's just as white as you, and you're just as white as him. This is the New Age. Of course, we will have to worship one Father, because there's only one God, you Christians say, you Catholics say. We agree to that. But it's the Father of the earth. It's the Father of fruit and flowers, Father of lambs, Father of fruitful gardens and trees and meadows, and a Father for all our agriculture, Father for our technology. That's real God, because that helps man. It's no longer a dominant, hierarchic, exclusivist, paternalistic, patriarchal church demanding sacrifices and waiting for pie in the sky. There's no pie in the sky. The pie is here. And there's enough for everybody if you Catholics and religions will stop being exclusivist and join in. That's the New Age. And the New Age is more subtle than anything else, because I'll tell you why. The essence of the New Age technique now being taught to companies and to company executives is self-control. And the exercises of the New Age being used in seminars, paid for thousands of dollars by big companies like GM and several other big companies in the United States, consists in submitting your mind to a discipline. And when we examine that discipline from our point of view here, we find out that discipline is almost the same as TM. It does the very same silencing of your faculties and leaves you wide open to any influence that will come in. Now I'll tell you one thing. Whatever other influences are out there looking for a point of entry, there's one influence roaming around like a lion, seeking whom he may devour, and that is Lucifer. And if you adopt this, the mental attitude that they are trying to inculcate to the New Agers, as they call them, you'll find that you are sitting duck for the most amazing row of influences. And we think that it's partly the rise of the New Age system of egalitarian treatment of all religions and the submission of the mind and the opening up of the spirit to the great force. We have found that the rise of that is coetaneous, is simultaneous with the rise of this intense diabolism, intense Satanism. So there must be some organic connection between the two. We're persuaded that there is a connection between the two. The New Age is pernicious because, see, it's good, it's compassionate. It says don't kill, don't steal, don't kill little children, don't conceive them either. But that's the most merciful way of not doing things. And don't overpopulate the world, and don't make war. No, make love. And join in the technological and industrial advancement of all peoples. And don't see black or white or sky blue, pink. Color doesn't matter. So it sounds very democratic, it sounds very compassionate, it sounds very human. The only thing is that Christianity, the message of Christ, is not democratic, it's not human, it's supernatural, and it's meant to prepare us for eternity. So the New Age is the subtlest attack on the Church. It has invaded the Church. And the amount of Catholics who now become Freemasons, say, or join organizations that are very anti-Catholic, is due to the fact that the leavening of this New Age mentality, who said that, haven't we been fighting long enough with each other? Why can't we sit down and practice love and agree with people and agree to build with them? What's wrong with that? And if I have a cathedral in Pittsburgh and you have no cathedral, and you're a Methodist or a Lutheran, well, have my cathedral, because we're all worshipping the same God. And so the mixture and the syncretism of all religions start, and you find a mixture. Say you find a meeting in Detroit of the local chapter of an international Jewish organization, meeting in unison with the Confraternity of the Sacred Heart and the Jewish and the Masonic Lodge, all perfectly good brothers in the Lord and sisters in the Lord. So they have sort of an amalgam, and they all feel good about it. And the Catholics worship Christ, and the Jews worship God, and the Masons have their own version of God, but we're all human. So it leaves you in peace, and there's cooperation, financial, social, political, and there's peace. Isn't that what we're all supposed to do, Bernard? So it's a very tempting thing. Instead of some fiery pope or some fiery theologian or some subtle preacher saying, no, there's a basic truth. Outside the Church there's no salvation. You can't be a good anything but a good Catholic if you want to be saved. One way or the other, you have to get grace through Christ, through the Church. That's unacceptable. Politically incorrect and socially unacceptable today. So that's the great crisis in the Church from the point of view of faith. The crisis undermining the Church from another side is the crisis of the papacy.
Now, related to the New Age philosophy, of course, is the feminist ideology, which has also pervaded the Church recently.
It has. Feminism is a new sort of not a heresy. It's not a heresy because they haven't been able to work out, despite their best efforts, and there's a flood of books for the last 5-7 years. I stopped buying the books finally, because it's an outstanding book, outstanding in venom or outstanding in historical research. But the flood of documents supporting feminism and pushing it is so great that you can't speak about it as a heresy, because they have not found a theological framework to justify their claims. But what they have is an intense emotion and passion. And it's a very funny thing, though, that when you come to talk to feminists and frequent their organizations and frequent their circles and their study groups, you always find two things coming immediately. You find that as they progress in their feminism, their feminist passion and their feminist emotion and feminist enthusiasm, they always end up with some form of Wicca. And Wicca is the old witchcraft, wherein the goddess Gaia and Sophia are worshipped, and in which lesbian love is blessed, and in which the earth is venerated as divine, and in which no mention of the son or the father are allowed. It's the mother and the daughter. In other words, feminism, theologically speaking, this is why they find it difficult to formulate an acceptable theology, because people are still inclined to have traditional ideas, is this: feminism aims directly at the heart of the Trinity. Like homosexuality, it wants to wipe out the idea of fatherhood and sonhood and daughterhood. It wants to have womanhood, and that's why they speak about woman church. That's the whole thing, womanhood and woman church. That's all there is. The rest is accretion, cultural accretion, and religious burdens taken over from patriarchal men and churchmen. It is, I suppose, if you were to ask me what is the most blasphemous form of side of Satan's attack on society, it is his sowing of feminism. It's a direct insult to Our Lady. She is the Queen of Heaven and the mother of all the living. She is the example of purity, chastity, motherhood, daughterhood. She's daughter of the Most High. She's mother of the Most High. And she's also the model of the wife. She was a real wife, a real spouse of St. Joseph. That's all attacked. Spouse, marriage, that's nothing to do with feminism, whatever. Women must be liberated from that. And lesbian love does liberate them from that.
So it's an attack on the family.
Ultimately on the Trinity. Because through the family they hope to attack Trinity. Because if the family is wiped out in human society, the Trinity ceases to exist. It's the ultimate aim is the Trinity, and that is Satan's hatred of that Trinity of divine persons that said, be damned, go to hell. And that's his weapon against it. And if he can destroy that, once you wipe out the Trinity, once you wipe out the whole idea of fatherhood and sonhood and daughterhood, and destroy the family, then there is no longer a divine family, there's no longer a human family, there's nothing but chaos. And in the social order, that's the most blasphemous success and effort that Satan has put through. The shame is this. The shame and the pity of women is this. Negatively speaking, the shame is this. Since women have got so far in entering what they call the patriarchal society, society hasn't got more merciful. The pilots, women pilots of helicopters and gunships who went to the Gulf were just as bloody-minded as the men. And we know that female executives in firms are the worst, the hardest to take. Men say, no, give me a crotchety old man any time you like. Give me the biggest son of a gun you can find, but not a woman. Cruel and merciless beyond belief once they depart from their role as women. That's the negative side of the shame. The positive side of the shame is that being called, by the very fact of being a woman, being called to be a replica of Our Lady, her beauty, her motherhood, her virginity, her purity, her daughterhood, and her closeness to God. And how closer can a human person be than by having eternity in your womb, and your model being the mother of God, personal model. Such an honor conferred on any woman who wants to imitate it, and they have rejected it. It's the shame of feminism, and it makes one cry at the lack of wisdom, the lack of perception, and also the hatred Satan has. He remembers one day in the garden when he was told, wait for her heel. She's going to walk on your head. She's going to walk on your head. You're going to be crushed by a woman. And her seed will be your undoing. So he hates that. You know, there's one scene when Marie Bernadette Soubirous was having the first visions of Our Lady in Lourdes. Remember that scene, the third time? She came down, she found the lady standing there with yellow roses in her feet and a yellow sash and this marvelous face, and she was smiling. She was smiling. And she had this strange joy. And when Bernadette said to her, who are you? She had this extraordinary joy, and she said, I am the Immaculate Conception. Said it in Bernadette's dialect. And then, but the first day Bernadette went down, she didn't know what to do. And she had an apron, and she always kept her rosary beads in the apron. She got her rosary beads because she thought it was the devil. And started saying the Our Father. And she saw a lady take her own rosary beads from her sash and say the Our Father, silently. And then she went to the first Hail Mary, and she saw Mary's fingers moving to the first bead. And so she went through the whole deck, and then she suddenly realized that it wasn't the devil. The devil wouldn't say the rosary. She progressed in talking at the second or third day, and then the word spread around the local peasantry to which she belonged. She was a peasant girl, that she was talking to the La Vierge. So all the peasants came down beside her, and they used to pass notes over to her and whisper, say, ask Our Lady to cure my calf, ask Our Lady to bring my husband back from Paris. Request them, and Our Lady was laughing at them pleasantly and saying, yes, I will, no, I can't, etc. And at a certain stage, in the middle of this, when they could only hear Bernadette's voice giving the messages and getting the answers from this virgin they couldn't see, in another of the caves, because this place was lined with grottos and caves, they heard the dirtiest, most threatening, smelling voice of about 1,000 lions hungry for flesh. It was obviously Satan's disruption of the scene. And everybody hushed. There wasn't a sound when they heard this, like wild animals waiting to tear you limb from limb. And Bernadette sort of appealed to Our Lady. And all Our Lady did, she didn't say a word. She just turned her head and looked at the mouth of the cave and silence. Silence. That's Our Lady's power. They only realize that's what they can inherit as women. If they want to change society, they want to cure men's chauvinism, she's the one who can do it. If they turn to her, they want to make the human race more compassionate, she's the mother of all compassion. But what a shame they missed that opportunity, missed their vocation, and they're killing the fruit of their own womb. What are they going to say to Our Lady when she says, I was a mother too? And you were a mother and you killed your baby? You killed 3 babies? And here they are looking at you. What does the woman say when she faces that accusation? What depth of hell is deep enough to hide you? Where can you hide from your shame? Organization. That's the difficulty. And people have got to, I find more and more Catholics and more people have got to, even non-Catholics, I always point out to them, there's a distinction between the union of all believers who are practicing their faith and and the organization which vehicles that. The Roman Catholic Church is the ideal vehicle for believers in Christ. But it's only an organization, and it's fading. And one of the themes of Windswept House, the sub-theme of this book, is that in a short time, humanly speaking, there will be no Holy Roman Catholic Church organization visible. There won't be any, and we must deal with that.
But something must have happened, that would have caused, let's say, since the 1960s, for this organization to seemingly start self-destructing.
Auto-demolition. Yeah, there was this consecration, this enthronement of Satan within the Vatican, of Lucifer, by the way.
Now, did that actually happen?
Yes, it's a historical fact. It was done one particular day by a certain group of people representing Luciferians all over the world, especially American Luciferians. It was done. And therefore, in a certain sense, Lucifer has power. He doesn't own yet, but I'm sure he hopes to own some pope as his man. I'm sure he does. And he expects to own some pope, not the present pope, but some pope, so that the house is really his. And the only one who can expel him is the owner of the house, and that owner is the pope. And he must carry out the exorcism.
Now,
and the cleansing of the house.
Some people who have read Windswept House, after they read about this enthronement of Satan, said, now I understand why there is this crisis in the church.
That's right.
Because doesn't it have a spiritual cause?
It must have. And that's why I remember going to Rome there last year and speaking with a very, very well-known cardinal and saying to him, but Your Eminence, you have got to go to the Holy Father and explain this. He said, no, what can I do? I'm only a simple cardinal. And I said, well, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? He said, nobody. Nobody's going to do it. Nobody will tell the Holy Father the truth. And he's too busy and too worn down to do anything about this. And that's the situation. And until that is done, by the way, there are 8 exorcists working in the Vatican under Father Amorth, Gabriel Amorth, who's a very good exorcist. But he is not the owner of the house. He doesn't represent Christ.
So only the Pope can really resolve this crisis in the church.
Can exorcise the demons.